no question that meal prepping can make your life easier. Benefits could include saving you time and money, helping you eat healthier, or helping you reduce food waste. And I'm not going to argue against those, but what if you want those benefits but absolutely hate meal prepping like I do? And I'm sure I can't be the only one out there, so this video is for you. Today I want to show you my preferred cooking system that all starts with a simple 2-minute decision, and it's the best thing I do at the start of a busy week. So in this video, we'll cover the downsides of meal prep, the human psychology behind my preferred cooking system, and lastly, I'll show that system in practice with 3 weeknight meals that you can have ready in no time. A Banh Mi inspired sandwich, a tostada, and a crispy beef topping for pasta. So by the end of this video, you'll have an alternative method to filling up a bunch of Tupperware containers. You'll expand your cooking creativity, and I promise you will start looking forward every Sunday to the morning Braise. Now, before we break it down, a quick thank you to today's sponsor, Made In. Today I want to talk about a newer addition to Made In's cookware lineup, and that is the Dutch oven, one of the most universal pieces of cookware you can have in the kitchen. And as an aside, these just look amazing in your kitchen. And you can actually change out the knobs, which is kind of sick. This brass handle, I think, looks perfect. So as far as specs go, the one that I'm using is the 5.5 quart Dutch oven. They're all made in France, heat safe in the oven up to 580 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can also be used on induction cooktops as well. In this video, I'm using it to sear and braise the meat, but it can also be used for deep frying, baking bread, soups or stews, all in the Dutch oven's wheelhouse. So head to the link below to shop this Dutch oven and other cookware from Made In during their Black Friday sale, which I would highly recommend taking advantage of. And thank you again to Made In for sponsoring this video. But now, let me explain my problems with meal prepping. As home cooks, we all want to make meals that taste really good, but it's also really nice if they take minimal time, minimal money, help reduce waste, and maybe a bonus if it's healthy too. Now, there are countless cooking systems that can be used to achieve those goals, depending on which of them is most important to you. For example, some of you may cook a meal from scratch, some of you may make a prepackaged grocer like Blue Apron or HelloFresh, others may make a box of mac and cheese or some equivalent, or you may heat up a meal prep container. And each of these systems have different pros or cons depending on your unique lifestyle and what works for you. For example, making a meal from scratch can be cheap, but it also likely requires the most energy and time. The prepackaged groceries may take less time, but they also cost way more. The box of mac and cheese, on the other hand, may be cheap and fast, but it's not really a complete meal. And a meal prepped meal is likely the best of all 4 options, as it's probably the cheapest, the fastest, and it will fill you up with a complete meal. Now, this is only true assuming you spent all of the time to actually go out and meal prep that food in the first place. And for me, this is the #1 problem that I feel like no one talks about with meal prepping. And that is, it takes a lot of energy to get started. Let me explain. As humans, it's been shown that we're wired to take the path of least resistance, even when it may lead to incorrect or non-optimal outcomes. And when it comes to successfully meal prepping, there is a ton of resistance. If you are meal prepping for even just a couple of days or the entire week, think of all the steps and decisions that need to go into it. First, you gotta think about what you wanna make this week, then you gotta find recipes that you are going to make, then you gotta pull together a long grocery list, you gotta go grocery shopping, unload the groceries, start to cut and prep the food, cook the food, portion the meals, and finally, you have to clean up the kitchen, which depending on what you made, you may have ended up using almost every pot and pan you have. Now, after you climb that mountain, yes, the time and money savings are definitely great, but you still may run into a couple of problems with meal prepped food, and here are the big ones for me. First, reheated meals don't taste very fresh and often lack texture. Secondly, there's no variety in meals, so if I happen to get bored after the second one, I'm stuck with it. Thirdly, I don't really like having to pre-portion meals because some days I'm hungrier than another. And then fourthly, I don't get to use my cooking skills and creativity during the week. And I'm not saying all this or making this video to take a stance as some kind of anti-meal prepping guy. If meal prepping works for you in your lifestyle, please continue to do it. But the reason I'm pointing out all of this is because even if I know I have a really busy week or won't have much time, I still just can't get down with meal prepping, which is why I found a way easier way, a path of least resistance that I think gets me about 85 to 90% of the benefits of prepackaged meals, except I know I can stick to the routine, and this is why I braise every Sunday. So we'll get into the base method and some of the meals that I made in just a minute or two, but first I need to explain why this method works so well for me, and it actually all has to do with basic human psychology. Let's unpack that. In the book Atomic Habits, the author James Clear shows this chart and explains that the difference between a good day and a bad day is often a few productive and healthy choices made at decisive moments. Each one is like a fork in the road, and these choices stack up throughout the day and can ultimately lead to very different outcomes. So if our goal is to make a dinner that tastes amazing, but also saves on money, time, and is healthy, that's likely a decision that's been made and influenced by an earlier decision. So I mentioned it earlier, but we're kind of wired to take the lazy route. In order to combat this, James Clear presents the 2-minute rule. This essentially boils down to identifying a 2-minute gateway habit that naturally leads you down a more productive path. And the gateway habit should be so easy that it's basically impossible not to do. For example, in the book, if your goal is to run a marathon, that's a very hard thing to do. So in order to work towards that, you have to start at the easiest gateway habit, and ideally, it should take you less than 2 minutes. So for the first one, putting on your shoes is really easy. The next step would be walking 10 minutes, then 10,000 steps, then running a 5K, and finally working yourself up to running a marathon. So it's a pretty basic concept, but the question is, how can we apply the 2-minute rule if our goal is to make a delicious meal with minimal time, money, and effort? And this is actually a really hard goal. Like I mentioned earlier, there's usually a lot more steps and decision than meets the eye. For example, what am I in the mood for? What ingredients do I have? Do I need to run to the store? Do I have time to make this? Normally, these are questions we ask ourselves before we even get started, and this is the problem. We need to develop a framework where we don't need to even think about all of that stuff, and this is why I came up with the 5-step framework that I use, and that is the Sunday Braise. The first very easy step is buy a braising cut of meat. That's literally it. And here's a short list of some good braising cuts, but you can find whatever is on sale or looks good to you. For me, I got a chuck roast, which is one of my favorite value to flavor cuts, but at this point, you aren't doing anything else. You don't need to think about how you want to braise it. You don't need to have a specific recipe in mind. All you are doing is bringing that braising cut home. So you may think you need to figure out what to actually do with that in step 2, but we're actually keeping it even simpler. Step 2, the easy step, is salt the meat. So all you have to do is pull the braising cut out of the packaging and sprinkle salt liberally over all of the sides. And typically I will just throw this in the fridge the day before to let it dry brine overnight, but you can do it in the same morning. Now, step number 3 is where the difficulty actually picks up a little bit. So the moderately hard step is braising the meat. And I've outlined the basic steps of braising, which are actually quite easy. But what starts to get hard about this step is you have to make a decision on how you want to flavor the braise. So at this step, you could start looking for a specific recipe like red wine braised short ribs or in a chili or barbecue sauce, but you still are kind of just meal prepping because you're locking all of that meat into one specific flavor profile, which is not really what I like to do if I want some versatility throughout the week. So for me, I like to keep it even simpler. For this one, I added the oil to the Dutch oven and then just dropped in the meat to sear. And you want to sear it on all sides to develop some nice browning. And I actually just skipped the aromatic base here and added the braising liquid, which in this case is just some beef broth. But legitimately, you could use water and it's still going to taste really good. So bring that liquid to a boil over the stove, and then I just pop it into a preheated 300-degree oven for 5 to 7 hours and go about your day. When you come back, just pull the beef out and it should shred apart beautifully and taste lip-smacking good. So I separate that out into containers and save the broth to use as well. So now, after step 3, we have some braised meat that is ready to take on a variety of flavorings throughout the week. And here is where it starts to get a little bit hard, as step 4 and 5 are decision steps that need to be done concurrently. 4 is flavor the braised meat with fridge and pantry staples, and then step 5 is make it into a delicious meal with minimal time, money, and effort. So at this point, I haven't actually done any thinking about what I happen to have in my fridge or pantry. As someone who cooks a lot, I have a wide variety of things and pantry staples that I keep on hand. And I do have a video if you guys want to check that out. But really, this is not about the specific fridge or pantry staples or recipes that I made. I want you to use this as inspiration, because I promise you, once you start those first 3 steps, the 4th and 5th step become much easier and you get way, way better at them over time. So with that being said, let's hop into dish number 1, which is a braised beef banh mi inspired sandwich. So for the banh mi, I set a pan over medium-high heat and added some of the braised beef. After it's been heated up and started to crisp, I add the pantry staples, which in this case is a squirt of sriracha, a squirt of hoisin sauce, and lastly, a couple shakes of Maggi seasoning. And just like that, after mixing it up, you have an absolutely mouth-smacking, spicy, sweet, and salty beef that could honestly be a meal on its own. But to actually turn it into a meal, this is done in step 5. To make this into a banh mi inspired sandwich, I needed some ingredients that I may not always have on hand. So for me, this was a baguette, some fresh cucumber, pickled carrots, a serrano pepper, cilantro, and some Kewpie mayo. To assemble the sandwich, first I hit it with some Kewpie mayo and then spread that on both sides. Next, I added 2 long slices of cucumber before adding the beef, the cilantro, and lastly, the pickled carrots. And this is one of the best sandwiches I've made in a while, especially considering how little mental and active effort it actually took to make. I'm literally just salivating thinking about this thing. This thing right here is an example of a creation that just shines by using this simple method. A couple of pantry and fridge sauces, and then pair it with some fresh vegetables. I did kind of more of a classic banh mi vegetable, but you could definitely do less, you could do more, whatever you want to. Yeah, it's kind of late, so I'm gonna finish the rest of this, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for dish number 2. Now I could make banh mi's for the rest of the week, but like I said, I get bored easily, and what's great about just salting and braising in a neutral liquid is that it can easily take on a variety of flavors, and here we have some beef tinga. So I covered this in an old video of mine, but to make an even simpler version, all you have to do is add some fridge and pantry staples to a blender. For this, I added a half can of tomatoes, 2 cloves of garlic, a big spoonful of chipotles and adobo, 1/4 medium onion, a sprinkle of dried oregano, and a big sprinkle of salt before just blending that up into a sauce. Now, all we have to do is combine it with the beef. Set a pan over medium heat and add a squirt of oil along with a bay leaf, and just let that sizzle for about 20 seconds before pouring in the sauce. Let the sauce simmer for about 5 minutes to get it cooking, and then you can toss in the braised beef from the fridge. I like to mix that up and let it simmer while stirring for about 10 minutes or so the flavor can develop as best as possible. And again, just like that, step 4 is done. To turn this into an actual meal, I sliced up some avocado, finely diced an onion, cut a couple of lime wedges, grabbed some cilantro and cotija cheese, and I'll be serving the beef on some tostadas. So to assemble, add some Greek yogurt or sour cream to the tostada before topping with the beef tinga and adding the sprinkle of diced onion, layer of the avocado, crumble the cotija cheese, add a sprig of cilantro, and lastly, a squeeze of lime. 3 quick notes on this one. Firstly, flat out delicious. Tinga poblana is such a great recipe. I've made a video on it in the past. Is this quite as good as maybe one that was slow stewed over an hour or 2? Probably not, but we're like 90% of the way there, I would say, at least. Very, very delicious. Now, secondly, is that this shows kind of the beauty of putting things in motion. We bought the braising cut, we salted it, then we braised it. So we already did some work up front, and then now this becomes a very approachable meal you can make on a weeknight. Normally, if you wanted to make tinga poblana from scratch, it would probably take you an hour, hour and a half or so. But with this, I can literally whip up a version of it in about 15, 20 minutes tops. Now the third thing is that the first two dishes really needed like a bulk of the meat, but the last dish is one that comes in handy when you are almost running out of that braised meat. The last thing that I love about this method is that it forces you to get creative, especially when you are running out of that braised meat. So instead of just housing the last bite or two, I like to make a crispy topping for pasta that uses some basic staples. To start, I finely mince some garlic and rosemary and then set a pan over medium heat with a little squirt of oil. Toss in the garlic and rosemary mixture to let it toast for just 10 seconds, and then you can mix that in with the beef. And you want to keep this over medium-low heat and just kind of spread the beef into a thin layer to let that fat render and fully crisp up. Once done, you have this delectable, crispy, garlicky beef that's a perfect pasta topping. For that pasta, I kept it really simple. I first made Marcella Hazan's 3-ingredient sauce, which I did with the other half of the tomato from the second recipe, a couple tablespoons of butter, another 1/4 of an onion, and a big sprinkle of salt before letting that simmer for 30 minutes. While that was going on, I also boiled some dried pappardelle pasta, and now let's bring this dish together. Add some of the sauce to the pasta and mix those together until it's well combined. Then I plated it up using the can of tomatoes to prop up the pasta with another spoonful or two of the sauce before adding the crispy beef topping, a final shaving of Parmigiano Reggiano, and then lastly I snipped on a little bit more of the fresh rosemary. So in conclusion, this video, though I do highly recommend them and they will be linked below, is not really about the recipes, but instead it's about applying the basics of that 2-minute rule to whatever your preferred cooking system is, whether it's meal prepping, cooking stuff completely from scratch, or like what I like to do is kind of a hybrid of both, where just one simple decision, buying a braising cut of meat at the grocery store before you even think about recipes or anything, can set you on this pathway of good decisions for the rest of the week and turn into a bunch of delicious 15 to 20 minute weeknight meals. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. If you guys try out this kind of ideology to making something this week, I would love to see it on Instagram. Just tag me. But that will wrap it up for me in this one. I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.